My parents canceled my 18th birthday to protect my golden child brother, then he broke into my apartment. The balloons were blue and silver. The banner on the living room wall said, "Happy birthday, Caleb." The cake on the dining table had his name written in blue cream across the white frosting. Not mine. His. I was standing in the doorway of my parents' house. It was my 18th birthday. There were maybe a dozen people in that room, relatives, a few family friends, and not one of them looked up and said anything to me when I walked in. They were all watching my brother. Caleb stood near the cake, laughing at something. He looked comfortable in that house in a way that had always come naturally to him. On my way down the hall, I'd passed the guitar case leaning against my bedroom wall, black, worn at the corners. I glanced at it for half a second without knowing why. Some instinct in me that hadn't found its name yet. My dad walked over and put his hand on my shoulder. He said, "We thought you'd understand. Caleb needed this more than you did." I looked at the cake. I looked at my dad. I didn't say a word. I just made a quiet decision standing there, and I kept it to myself. I didn't know that night how far things would go. I didn't know that my brother was already watching me, and I didn't know what he was planning to take. Growing up, I shared a room with Caleb until I was 12. That was fine. What wasn't fine, or what I didn't have the language for until much later, was noticing how a room changed when he walked into it. Any room. My parents' faces did something when Caleb entered that they didn't do for me. Not a dramatic thing. Just a small, consistent brightness. A turning toward him the way plants turn toward light. At my 5th grade graduation, my parents forgot to bring the camera. I remember standing in the gym holding my certificate, scanning the bleachers. They were there, just distracted, my mom said later. Parking was a nightmare. At Caleb's 8th grade graduation, 2 years after my dad took so many photos, he filled an entire memory card and spent 2 weekends putting together a physical album. It's still on the shelf in their living room. I've seen it every time I visited. I didn't turn bitter about it when I was young. I turned inward instead. I found music when I was 14, partly by accident, a second-hand guitar at a neighbor's garage sale, and partly because music was the one space where Caleb had no presence. No comparison. I taught myself from YouTube videos, practiced in my room after school, and eventually played a short set at my high school talent show. My parents didn't come. I told myself they were busy. I told myself that for a long time. The first real guitar I bought, I paid for myself. $340 saved from a part-time job stocking shelves at a grocery store. When I brought it home, I set it on my bed and just looked at it for a minute. My mom came to the doorway, glanced at the guitar, and said, "That's sweet, honey, but maybe think about something more stable. Something like your brother is doing." She said it without any cruelty. That was almost the harder part. She genuinely thought she was giving me good advice. I still wanted things to be different. That's important to say. I wasn't waiting for an excuse to walk away. The year before I turned 18, I helped Caleb prep for his college applications, sat with him at the kitchen table going through practice essays. I picked up extra shifts so I wouldn't have to ask my parents for anything. And about 6 weeks before my birthday, I gave my mom a written list, names and numbers of the people I wanted at my party. She took out her phone and put it in her notes app right in front of me. She said she'd handle it. I believed her. 4 weeks before my birthday, Caleb called home crying. And everything changed. 3 days before my birthday, my mom asked me to come into the kitchen. She had that look she gets when she's already decided something and just needs the other person to agree. She didn't sit down. She stood near the counter with her arms crossed loosely, not defensive, just settled. She told me that Caleb had gotten a rejection letter, a company he'd applied to. She said he was devastated, that he needed the family support right now, and then she asked in the same even tone someone might use to reschedule a dentist appointment if we could move my birthday to next month. Just a quiet dinner, maybe. "You're strong, Owen. You can handle this." And then, "You don't want to make this harder for him, do you?" I asked her if she was serious. She looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable. I didn't say anything else. I went to my room and closed the door. I found out later that the rejection was from Caleb's backup option. He'd already been accepted to his first choice. My parents knew that. I didn't know it that night. On my actual birthday, I came home to find the party already going. Blue and silver balloons. His name on the cake. 12 people in the living room who had not been told or had not thought to ask whose birthday it actually was. My dad found me in the hallway and said the same thing he would say again years later in a different room in front of people who actually heard it. "Caleb needed this more than you did." I checked my phone before I went to sleep that night. There was one message from my mom sent that morning in response to a text I'd written weeks earlier. I'd told her I was really excited about my birthday. Her reply was a single thumbs-up emoji. That was it. That was the whole conversation. I went to my room. I picked up my guitar and played until the house went quiet. I made myself a promise that night. No noise, no announcement, just a decision that I was going to build something entirely my own, something that didn't need their permission to exist. I had no idea what Caleb was already beginning to plan. I moved out at 19. 2 weeks after the first real paycheck I received from a music venue, not much, barely enough to cover a security deposit on a small place across town. I packed 2 bags, loaded an old mattress into a borrowed truck, and carried my guitar case down the front steps of my parents' house. My dad stood in the doorway and watched. He said, "This seems impulsive. Caleb has a plan." I nodded and kept walking. That was the whole goodbye. I wasn't angry when I left. That surprised me, actually. I thought I would be. Instead, I felt something closer to relief, quiet, careful, the kind you don't want to say out loud in case it disappears. I didn't ask my parents for a single dollar toward the move. I didn't want anything from that house except what I'd already built inside it. The first year out, I worked morning shifts at a coffee shop and played small venues on weekends, bars, open mics, the occasional private event. I started posting original clips online. Nothing polished. Just me, the guitar, and whatever I'd been writing that week. I had 40 followers for a long time. Then 400. I didn't tell my family. When my mom called, which was occasionally and usually brief, she'd ask if I'd found a real job yet, and whether I'd thought about going back to school. Like Caleb did, she'd add. Always that. Like it was a compass point and I was the one who'd wandered off. A local music blogger shared one of my clips on a Thursday night. By Friday morning, my follower count had doubled. I took a screenshot and kept it to myself. There was no one in my family I wanted to show it to. I found out later that a mutual cousin had mentioned my online music at a family gathering I hadn't attended. I wasn't there, so I don't know exactly how it came up. What I do know is that Caleb messaged me directly the next day. It came in at 1:43 p.m. on a Tuesday, that particular kind of late-night hour that tells you someone's been sitting with something all day. He wrote, "Saw your little music thing. Pretty cute for a hobby." I didn't reply. 3 hours later, another message. Mom said, "You're doing well. Weird how people cheer for you when you're not around family." I read that one twice. Then I put my phone down and went to sleep. But in the morning, I went back and took a screenshot of both messages, timestamps and all. I didn't know why exactly. It just felt like the kind of thing you keep. It didn't stop there. A few days later, my mom texted, "Caleb says, you've been telling people things about our family. Is that true? You know how much that hurts him." Then my dad. "We raised you better than this. Whatever you think you're proving with this music stuff, it's not worth your family." I hadn't told anyone anything about my family. I hadn't posted anything about them. I had done nothing except exist and build something and let people notice it. That was apparently enough. I screenshotted both messages. Then I created a folder on my phone and named it Glass Houses. 4 screenshots went in. I closed the app and stood there in my kitchen for a moment looking at nothing in particular. Whatever I thought this was some low-level family drama, the usual noise, I was wrong. I just didn't know it yet. What was coming wasn't a text message. It was my front door. I came home from a gig around 11 on a Wednesday. Small venue, attentive crowd. I was in a decent mood when I turned down my street. My front door was ajar. Not broken, not kicked in, just not fully closed. I pushed it open and stepped inside. My laptop was on the desk. My wallet on the counter. Everything looked normal until I saw the guitar case near my bedroom door lid open, the foam interior empty. I stood there for a full minute without moving. That guitar was a limited edition acoustic I'd spent 2 years saving for. Not my first one, the next step up, bought the month after my first paid gig. It had a small scratch along the lower bout from that night from knocking it against a mic stand coming off stage in the dark. I knew every mark on it. I knew exactly what it had cost me. And I don't just mean the money. I walked into the bedroom. On the comforter placed precisely in the center of the bed was a photograph. 2 boys, one around 6, one around 9, both smiling into a camera. The younger one was me. The older one was Caleb. I recognized it immediately. That photo had been sitting on the shelf in my parents' living room my entire life. Someone had lifted it off that shelf, carried it here, and left it on my bed like a signature. My hands started shaking. Not from fear. From something older. The same feeling I'd had standing in my parents' hallway on my 18th birthday, hearing my dad explain why Caleb needed my birthday more than I did. I knew exactly who had been in my apartment. What I didn't know yet was how clearly he documented himself doing it. I had installed a small security camera in my hallway about 3 months earlier. The building had dealt with a few minor incidents, and a neighbor had suggested it. I'd nearly forgotten it was there. I pulled up the footage that same night. Caleb walked into frame at 7:42 p.m. Casual pace, no hurry. He stopped at my door, produced a key one I had never given him, which meant he'd made a copy at some point without my knowing, and let himself in. He was inside for under 4 minutes. When he came back out, the tote bag he'd brought had more weight to it. Near the end of the hallway, he glanced up, directly at the camera. He had no idea it was there. His face was completely clear. I paused on that frame for a long time. The 7:42 p.m. timestamp matched a location tag Caleb had posted to his social media that same evening, 2 blocks from my building. He hadn't tried to hide that he was in the area, and when I checked my bedroom window from inside, I found faint scuff marks along the exterior sill. Someone had been standing out there before the break-in looking in. This wasn't impulsive. It was planned. I added everything to the glass houses folder. Then I called the non-emergency police line and filed a report just after midnight. The officer who took my information listened without interrupting. When I told him I had security footage showing the individual's face clearly, he paused and said, "Okay, we're going to want to see that." I told him I'd already saved 3 copies in 3 different places. There was a short silence on the line. Then he said, "Good thinking." That was the moment I understood this wasn't going to stay in the family. And honestly, it hadn't been a family matter for a long time. The investigation moved faster than I expected. The officer who'd taken my report called 2 days later to say they'd spoken to Caleb. I asked what he'd said. There was a brief pause on the line. "He told us you'd left the guitar at your parents' house a while back and probably just forgot it was there." I let that sit for a second. Then I told the officer to check the footage again, specifically the tote bag Caleb was carrying when he left, which had been flat on his way in and noticeably heavier on his way out. The officer said they already had. I filed the report number into the glass houses folder alongside everything else. What I hadn't anticipated was what Caleb and my parents did next. Within a week, the story, their version of it, had quietly spread to extended family and a few people in overlapping social circles. The version where I was volatile. The version where I'd imagined the whole thing or provoked it, or was using the situation to get attention for my music. I wouldn't have known any of this except that a venue manager I'd worked with twice reached out and said someone had contacted him asking questions about my reliability. He told me because he thought I should know. He didn't think it was right. That was when I called an attorney. She listened to everything, the police report, the footage, the texts from Caleb and my parents, the venue manager's account. She went through the glass houses folder screenshot by screenshot. When she was done, she said the break-in and theft were straightforward. The defamation angle, the story being spread to professional contacts, added a second layer she could build a civil case around. Property theft, criminal trespass, defamation. 3 columns. I signed the paperwork and left her office thinking about something I'd heard once: people who live in glass houses. My family had spent years building one. They'd handed me every stone themselves. Around the same time, I posted a short clip online. No caption, nothing dramatic. Just me and my backup guitar, an older acoustic I'd nearly sold twice, playing something I'd written the night I came home to find the case empty. A mid-sized music account shared it on a Friday. By the following Thursday, I had 40,000 new followers, and a message from a journalist asking if I'd be willing to talk. The piece she eventually wrote called me a genuinely self-made artist, building something real with no infrastructure behind him. I read that line a few times. I thought about my dad watching me carry my guitar case down the front steps. Caleb has a plan. I put my phone down. I hadn't heard from my family directly in weeks when Aunt Linda called. She'd been at that birthday party, my birthday party, the one with Caleb's name on the cake, and I'd always sensed she knew what she was watching even if she hadn't said anything at the time. She told me the family was holding a graduation dinner for Caleb at my parents' house on Saturday. She told me she'd made it clear to my parents that if I wasn't on the guest list, she wasn't coming either. She said it like it was the only reasonable position to take. Maybe it was. I told her I'd be there. After I hung up, I called my attorney and gave her the date. Then I printed 2 documents, the police report and the civil case file, and slid them into a plain envelope. I was not going to that dinner to make a scene, but I had spent years walking into that family's rooms with nothing to stand on. I set the envelope on my passenger seat and drove. This time was going to be different. The backyard had been decorated well. String lights ran the length of the fence. There was catered food on a side table, and somebody had put together a proper centerpiece for the long rectangular table that ran down the middle of the yard. About 15 people. Family, a few of Caleb's friends, a couple of my parents' neighbors. My parents had spent money on this. I noticed that the way you notice weather, not with judgment, just with your eyes open. Aunt Linda met me near the back door. She hugged me before I'd said a word. I'm glad you came, she said quietly. I told her I was glad too. The seating was assigned. My name was near the end of the table next to Aunt Linda, the full length of the table away from Caleb. I sat down. The envelope was in my inside jacket pocket. I'd decided on the drive over that it was going to stay there unless someone made it necessary to take it out. I was still hoping nobody would. Midway through the meal, Caleb stood up and tapped his glass. He talked about himself for a while, the graduate program, a new position he'd accepted, everything coming together the way he'd always planned. He thanked my parents for their support, thanked his friends for being there. He didn't look in my direction once. Then, near the end, he did. He smiled the way someone smiles when they've been waiting to say something. And oh, and thanks for always being the reminder of what happens when you don't take life seriously. A few people laughed, not everyone. One of Caleb's friends started, and then seemed to catch himself. Aunt Linda didn't make a sound. I picked up my glass and took a slow sip of water and set it back down. I didn't say anything. I wasn't ready yet, and more importantly, I didn't need to be. My dad stood up next. He said he was proud of both his sons, then paused in a way that made clear the sentence wasn't balanced. He talked about Caleb doing things the right way, making a plan and following through. Then he looked at me. Owen's found his own path. We hope it works out for him. He said it with warmth. That was almost the worst part. He genuinely thought he was being generous. Aunt Linda set her fork down. James, her voice was even. When's the last time you went to one of Owen's shows? My dad blinked. We've been busy. He had 40,000 new followers in a single week, she said. Did you know that? The table went quiet in a specific way. Not the quiet of nothing happening, but the quiet of 15 people deciding where to look. I watched Caleb's jaw tighten. He looked at me across the length of the table. Of course he's doing the social media thing, he said. It's easy when you've been bad-mouthing your family to get sympathy online. There it was. The same accusation from the text said out loud in front of witnesses. I reached into my jacket. No rush. No announcement. I pulled out the envelope, removed the first document, and placed it on the table face up. Actually, Caleb, I said, let's talk about what's been said to who. It was the police report. I turned it so the table could read the heading. My dad stopped mid-breath. My mom's hand went still on her glass. I opened my phone and played the security footage, 30 seconds of Caleb walking into frame the key, 4 minutes inside the tote bag, heavier on the way out, his face clear at the end of the hall. I didn't narrate it. I let it play. Then I took out the photograph, the one he'd left on my bed, the one of 2 boys smiling into a camera, and placed it next to the police report. My mom recognized it before anyone else. I watched it move across her face. I slid the civil case file across the table toward Caleb. Property theft. Criminal trespass. Defamation. I didn't say anything about it. And Caleb pushed back from the table slightly. You're insane, he said. You're doing this because you're jealous. You've always been jealous of me. His voice had climbed just enough for everyone to hear the edge in it. Aunt Linda looked at him. Quiet. Clear. I've heard enough. That photo is from the shelf in your living room, Caleb. Everyone at this table knows where it's from. Nobody argued with her. A few of Caleb's friends looked down. My dad looked at the ceiling. My mom looked at nothing I could identify. Caleb looked at my father, and my father said nothing back. I put the documents back into the envelope. I tucked it into my jacket. I'll let the attorney handle the rest, I said. I stood up, turned to Aunt Linda, and thanked her for making sure I was on the list. She nodded once. I walked through the yard and out the side gate. Behind me, the table was very quiet. I didn't know it then, but that quiet was about to get expensive. The guitar came back 12 days later. No note. Just a delivery box left outside my door. The instrument packed inside with enough bubble wrap that whoever had done the packing clearly understood it had value. I opened the case and checked every inch of it. The scratch along the lower bout was still there, right where I'd left it. I closed the case, set it against the wall, and didn't think about it for a while. My attorney called the following week. Caleb had retained his own lawyer. The theft and trespass components were moving toward a settlement. His attorney had made contact, which she said was a good sign of how clearly the footage read. The defamation layer was still active. There was a second complication she mentioned carefully. The statement Caleb had given to the police that I'd left the guitar at my parents' house and forgotten it had been formally contradicted by the security footage. He'd filed a false statement with law enforcement. That wasn't something she'd introduced into the case. It had introduced itself. I thanked her and told her to keep me updated. My parents didn't call. No texts, no voicemails. They had always had something to say about my choices, my path, what Caleb was doing, what I should be doing instead. The silence from that direction was new. I didn't fill it. I just let it be quiet. Then my mom texted. 2 weeks after the dinner. 7 words, I hope you're happy. You've destroyed our family. I read it once. I thought about a thumbs up emoji sent the morning of my 18th birthday. I thought about a cake with someone else's name on it. I took a screenshot, dropped it into the Glass Houses folder, and put my phone face down on the counter. They had built something over many years, a version of the family where one son could do no wrong, and the other was there to absorb whatever didn't fit the image. I hadn't destroyed that. I just stopped holding it up. Aunt Linda called that same evening. She didn't ease into it. She said, "You did the right thing." And I should have said something a long time ago. There was weight in that last part. She had been in my parents' living room on my 18th birthday. She had seen the balloons, the banner, the cake, with Caleb's name. She had watched it happen and stayed quiet. I'd never asked her why. I didn't ask now either. The fact that she was saying it years later out loud, without prompting, was the only part that mattered. I told her I knew she meant it. She said she'd be in touch. We said goodbye, and I sat with the quiet for a while and found that it felt for the first time in a long time like mine. I bought a new guitar a few months after the dinner. Not a replacement, exactly, more like a next chapter. I found it at a small shop in a city my parents have never visited. I played 3 that afternoon before I found the one that felt right. Paid for it with money I'd earned playing music, drove home with it in the back seat, and that was it. No ceremony. Just a guitar and a drive home. The audience has kept growing. A national publication reached out for a second interview. I play a small venue every other week now, and I can see it in the room, people who know the words, people who came back a second time, people who found me through a clip on their phone at some late hour and decided to show up in person. The guitar I play now is still getting its marks. Different venues, different nights, and so am I. I don't measure what I've built the way my family measured Caleb's path. I measure it by the moment a room full of strangers sings something back to me that I wrote alone. I am, as it turns out, a self-made man. Not because I had to be, because I chose to be. I tell this not for sympathy and not to settle anything the attorney is handling what needs to be handled. What I want, if I want anything from saying it out loud, is for someone listening right now who has spent years hearing, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" to understand that comparison was never about you not being enough. It was about them needing you to be less. There's a difference. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Caleb got every birthday, every graduation, every spotlight they could aim at him, and I built my own light. That's enough. That's more than enough.